this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part two of my discussion with Rich Diviney, retired Navy SEAL commander, inspirational speaker, and best-selling author of The Attributes. We pick up the conversation with me talking to Rich about the best strategies for increasing and improving attributes you may be low on. One of the things I was really impressed when I read the book was, obviously many things, but one that stuck out was, you did all these parachute jumps and you're scared of heights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so clearly you had to work on, and you did it. There was progressions, and you talked about, I think it was 5 weeks. You did 3 jumps in some like paratrooper school, and if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. I'm doing this from memory. And then you worked your way up to do hey-ho jumps, and yet I'm sure your fear of heights was still there.
Maybe you just it's still there. Well, so it's a great question. There's 2 parts there. So let's talk about first. Let's talk first about the inoculation. So fear inoculation. So what I was doing there, was I was engaging in what I call fear inoculation, for a specific context, which was heights in this case, and say even parachute jumping. Right. The more you place yourself into an environment where you typically feel fear, part of what fear is uncertainty. And so I know you and I are going to get together again and talk about the second book later on, right? But the second book's called Masters of Uncertainty. But fear involves uncertainty, and so by doing something repeatedly, you are creating certainty around that act, and therefore starting to mitigate your fear of it. Okay, that way that's the difference. And I think in the book I talk about, we used to do jump trips where you do 50 jumps in 1 week, right? By jump 25 or 30, it's you're starting to just go. It's not, you're not really thinking about it anymore. Okay, that's fear inoculation. So that's part of a strategy in terms of using that. However, I want to address the more important question is when it comes to attributes. Can you in fact change or move up attributes, or in some cases move down? The answer is yes. You can deliberately work on increasing an attribute you're low on, or even decreasing. There's cases for both. It just takes some work. Okay. So in other words, what it requires is, first you have to know you're low on it. Okay. The second is you have to have a desire, need, or motivation to move it, to change it. Right. So in other words, like I said before, just because you're low on an attribute doesn't mean you need to move it. But assuming the second is true, then you have to go find environments that test and tease and develop that attribute. So if you're low on patience and you say, I want to work on my patience, I want to become more patient, you have to go find environments that test and tease your patience, whatever that looks like for you. It could be deliberately drive in traffic, or I'll pick the longest line in the grocery store to stand. I always say having kids, that'll develop patience, right? But whatever that is, you can do that with any attribute. You can do it up or down. I was talking to a gentleman who took the assessment, very successful guy, had multiple $1 million exits from companies. He was in his 70s. And I looked at his we were talking about his results, and one of his bottom 5 was competitiveness. And I said to him, does that surprise you? And he said, no, it doesn't surprise me at all. I said, why? He said, because when I was a younger man, I was hyper competitive. And it was probably in my 30s, I recognized that my hyper competitiveness was ruining my relationships, both with the people around me, my family, even myself. And so I made a conscious decision to dial down, to bring down my competitiveness. And over the years, he brought that down. So you can deliberately work on bringing up or down an attribute, but those dials are a little bit hard to move. What people have to understand is what's happening more often, in fact, most often in regular life, is we're dialing up or dialing down attributes deliberately. We're making conscious choices to do it, right? So in other words, if I'm low on patience, I'm walking into an environment saying, okay, I got to dial up my patience for this one, right? I'm dialing it up deliberately, but it's taking conscious thought. So this attribute list that you get, okay, this is going to define your performance without thinking. It's you at your most raw, okay? But in regular everyday life, when there's not a lot of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, we have the ability to deliberately dial this stuff up or down, which is very advantageous for our ability to be acceptable social creatures, right? Because sometimes the attributes that we're high on, one of my friends, his number one was humor. His number one attribute was humor. And I said, do you sometimes have to dial down your humor? He's like, oh yes, because the joke I want to tell is not appropriate at all, right? So he does a deliberate dial it down, right? and sometimes we're dialing up. So in all aspects of life, people say often, hey, these attributes, do they change at work or at home? Depending on where you are. And the answer is no. That basic order, that rank order, doesn't change. But what's happening is the environment, whether home or work, is requiring you to make conscious effort to dial up or dial down these attributes. So that's happening more often with these things.
Well, one of the attributes you mentioned was empathy. And in the book, you actually talk about somebody who was a former guest on the podcast, Bob Chapman from Barry Waymailer, and he's a great guy. What role do trust and empathy play in teams where performance is based more on the attributes and skills?
Well, again, it depends on the team. I will say, in a SEAL team, having too much empathy can be a detriment because of the job you're asked to do. We find the same thing with ER nurses and ER surgeons. They say, if I have too much empathy, I cannot do my job. I have to be able to dial that down. Now, in your general practitioner, right, for example, you need more empathy. If you have no empathy from a general practitioner, you're going to feel you're going to have a bad experience. So now I would offer, however, that leadership, one of the most common desired attributes for people to choose another as someone they trust or someone they will follow is empathy. In other words, can you get into the shoes of another human being, or even at least make an attempt to, okay? If you're making an attempt to empathize, people will feel cared for. And it all adds to this idea of trust and building trust. And part of a trust equation is compassion. I care about you as a human being. Empathy is one of those behaviors that allows someone to feel that way. But again, I will caveat this by saying leadership is a choice. Leadership is a choice by an individual. Every individual is going to make their own decisions about who they choose to follow. And some of these attributes that we feel are really required for leadership, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people are like, no, that's someone I want to follow. And they have a whole different set of attributes that they're choosing to follow. So it is a very subjective choice.
One of the things I took away was I'd always thought fearless leader was a good thing, but apparently that's not a good thing.
Yeah, fearlessness. I hate the word fearless, and part of it is I had a very great mentor when I was a young officer who said, "Hey, Rich, beware the fearless leader because that person's going to get you killed." Again, I talk about fear in the uncertainty book, but fear is a risk assessment tool. It's nature's risk assessment tool, and those who don't understand it and utilize it for that purpose will find themselves running into stuff that they shouldn't be running into. So fear allows us to think better, be more, not get complacent, to pay attention. It focuses us. It gives us adrenaline. There's a lot of things that fear does for us that really get us in the zone for top performance. What we can't let it do is overwhelm us or get into amygdala hijack or sideline us. But beware those who are fearless. They're trouble, or will soon be getting into trouble. So.
One of the things that surprised me about the book is I learned a lot about neuroscience. I didn't know. There's a lot. You talk a lot in the book about the amygdala and the forebrain and all the different things. So I learned a lot just about neurology, I guess.
Yeah. Well, for me, first of all, I love neuroscience. I think it's. I've always thought it was cool. I'm a fanboy when it comes to neuroscience. But one of the reasons is because if we take some of these concepts and we can explain them neuroscientifically, they become very human and they therefore become ubiquitous. So in other words, you can take the Navy SEALs off the pedestal and say, hey, this is not a Navy SEAL thing. This is a human thing. So understanding the neuroscience behind this stuff allows us to look at some of these things we see people do and say, wait a second, this is not because they're some superhero. It's because they actually are accessing parts of their neurology and physiology in a different way. And there's a chance that you can, in fact, do the same thing, maybe in a different context, but it humanizes things in a very meaningful way. So that's why I like to add that flavor to anything I do.
Now, in the book, you also tell the story of Hank, who was working his way back from, let's say, a consequence of a bad decision or a decision he made, good or bad. And one of the things he did, the first thing he did was he decided not to quit, which of course is really important. You got to keep going. Yeah. But the thing he did that resonated with me at least was he got out from behind his desk, got out from behind his computer, got out from behind the email, and made a point to meet face to face with people. Why was that face-to-face interaction so important, do you think?
Well, it's important because we as humans are social creatures, and so the connection we make between other human beings is meaningful, and it involves all of our senses. Visual, feel, smell, touch, all that stuff. And so this is why physical interactions with human beings are much, much more meaningful than even phone calls or certainly emails. Because even an email you can guess on inflection, but inflection is, what do they say? I mean, I think it's about 89 or 90% of the communication that we do with other human beings is not verbal, right? Yeah. Only 9 or 10% is the actual words we're saying. So there's so much other stuff that goes into the way we interact with human beings, and there's also neurobiological exchange going on, oxytocin and things like that. And so getting out and getting face to face with people is meaningful. It shows them that you care. It creates a connection that you otherwise wouldn't. It's why any one of us who are in a virtual environment where we're emailing someone for maybe weeks or months, and then so finally we get to meet that person. Oh, I finally have a face behind the name. Now the very next email is going to feel completely different because you've just met with that person face to face. And so that's a secret Hank learned very, very early on, and allowed him to really become and learn leadership in a whole different way. But not even leadership, it's relationship. But that's really what leadership is, by the way. But it's relationship, and that face to face stuff. And the good news is you can do it via Zoom. You can do it via a video conference as well. It doesn't get any more powerful than the physical presence. This is why offsites are great for companies and organizations. Even if you're a highly online business, to be able to once in a while get the group together, meet face to face, and talk and visit and maybe have activities. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, we work on big projects that are global. And they can be multi-year projects. We find that if you bring people together for a week, face to face, you'll establish relationships that allow you to run that project remotely the rest of the 2 years, just based on the relationships in the first week.
Yes.
And the way that I like to say it is, I'm turning Hank from an email address, to which I don't really feel a connection, into a living, breathing human being that I'm now connected with. I learn about, he has kids, I have kids, so there's some connection there, like you said.
Yes, 100%, and that's so important, and we can't forget that in the modern age. I think has brought, and even COVID brought this. I mean, you and I are having this podcast on Riverside right now, and I do many virtual podcasts. That wasn't as huge of a thing before COVID, and even I give keynotes, to organizations and teams. Prior to COVID, to tell an organization, hey, I can give you my keynote virtually, they were like, what the heck are you talking about? I believe that the work environment, the workspace has benefited from this type of technology, but we just can't over-index on it. We have to understand the power of actual human interaction.
Yeah, I find that when I do speeches, I can do it virtually, like you said, but I'm better able to connect if I'm in the room and I can see people's faces. I can see the reactions. It's one of those things for me, at least, when I'm talking about a topic, I try to inject humor. Yeah. Everybody's got their camera off. They're muted. I don't know if it's landing. I can't tell. And it's really disconcerting as somebody who's trying to speak and engage with a group, right? So,
well, I actually think the virtual environment is way worse for the speaker than it is for the audience, because you get charged when you have a human connection. I mean, and also it depends on the platform you're using. Some platforms are better than others in terms of being able to see people and see faces. But yeah, you tell a joke that, in an audience, you get a laugh, that charges everybody. Whereas in a virtual environment, you look for the people who are laughing. Like, okay, that person got it. And sometimes I've given speeches where they don't have even the cameras on people. So I'm just talking to my slides, which is the worst.
It is.
You got nothing. You got nothing. So
you get no feedback.
Yeah.
So another one of the attributes you talked about that is a myth, and I really want to talk about this because it's one of my pet peeves, is these people who think that they can multitask.
Yes.
You talked about it's really task switching. And let me start with some numbers here, because everybody thinks you're good at it, and yet research repeatedly shows that people are not. So the study you mentioned in the book, I think it was at the University of Utah, 70% of the people thought they were above average in their ability to multitask. And in reality, 98% of us get worse at performing each individual task when we what we're really doing is multi-switching or task switching,
Yeah,
right?
task switching. Yeah.
And
So, and
this
I
is one
think
of
it
those
was
cases where that just makes it worse.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I think 2% were what they call super taskers, which they
And
actually.
we're all in that 2% though.
We all think we are, yeah. But even those 2%ers are doing what you call what we say are task switching. So task switching, the idea again, neuroscientifically, is that our frontal lobe, our conscious mind, can't necessarily focus on more than one thing at a time. Now, there's neuroscientists will say there's a level of awareness you can keep on something else while you're doing one thing, but we ultimately we're focusing on that one thing. And people who don't believe me, they can say, well, Rich, no, I can listen to my podcast and drive my car. Okay. The problem is the reason why you could do that is because you've relegated that other thing to your unconscious mind. You don't have to think about your car, driving your car to drive your car. However, if you're driving a car, listening to your podcast, and someone swerves in front of you and you have to take evasive maneuvers to get out of the way, you'll have to rewind the last 15 seconds of that podcast because your brain will have hopped. Okay. And so task switching and task switchers, people who are high on it, they are very good at going from the conversation to the email to this to that. They can pull out and then refocus in very rapidly. It's easy for them. Okay. Other people who are lower on task switching, they find it difficult to pull out, or if they're pulled out, find it difficult to refocus back in. Okay, that's just it's who we are. It's however we show up. So really, it's the ability to task switch is an attribute, and the extent to which we can do it is going to be unique to us. And there's no judgment there. I mean, there's an advantage to people who can task switch very rapidly. There's blind spots that those people have to be aware of. There is advantage to people who don't task switch very well. And there's blind spots they have to be aware of. So all of these attributes come with advantages and blind spots. It's just a matter of understanding what we have unique to us. Because again, every vehicle on the planet comes with advantages and blind spots. What kind of vehicle are you? Let's figure that out.
Well, I think everybody thinks they're in that 2% for sure. And to me, it's the way I always explained it is, okay, so you're doing three things at once, but if you're on an interstate traveling 70 miles an hour and then you go from 3 lanes to 1, the first thing you probably do is turn the radio down because now you need to focus. So you're not really multitasking, are you?
That's right. That's exactly right. Because your brain is going to focus in, and when you really have to focus in, if other things become a distraction. So.
And the other stat that was in the book was it takes about 20 minutes on average to really refocus and re-engage on whatever that task was that you pulled yourself out of.
Yeah, unless you're really good at it, unless you're really high on task switching, you're really good at it. It typically takes about 20 minutes. So what we have to recognize is we have things pulling our attention away constantly if we let them. Our phones are just a massive amount of task switching opportunities. Any beep, even this is why I'm sure you do the same thing. When I speak, I always leave my phone with the person who gave me the mic. I leave it. I don't have it on my person because even a vibration that I feel my brain, even though I don't look like I've stopped what I'm doing, my brain will have noticed that and pulled me slightly away from what I'm doing. So we just unfortunately sometimes fill our lives, fill our days with distractions that are pulling our attention away from what we want to do, and so we just end up just switching focus points. Now, by the way, this is neurologically exhausting. If we feel like we're like, I didn't do anything today, but I'm tired. A lot of us felt this way during COVID. We were home, and we were home all day, and at the end of the day, we're absolutely exhausted. And we're like, why the heck am I exhausted? It's because we were basically bringing all of the contexts of our lives into one place and task switching through them. At one point, you're on a work call, then suddenly you have to make lunch, then suddenly you have to help your kid with calculus, then suddenly you have to walk the dog, then you have to go back on a call. You are task switching constantly. That's very energetically expensive for our brains. And so we will, in fact, be more relaxed people and have more energy if we limit the distractions. I have very few alerts on my phone, and that's quite deliberate because I just don't want to be pulled away. I don't want that to keep on making my brain take my focus off of what I'm doing in the moment.
Now, are there ways to get better at task switching?
There's of course, yeah. The answer is yes. There's always ways to get better at task switching. There's always ways to get better at any attribute. I would have to think about some of the things you could do. It probably just involves a deliberacy in, okay, I'm going to pull my focus off of this and I'm going to refocus. And it's really a concentration effort to say pull out and then push in. So I think you can get better. It may, in fact, would be one of those attributes that it's a little bit harder to get naturally better, and we just have to really focus Same thing with compartmentalization or even discernment. Sometimes you just have to just pay attention and focus. But yeah, you can get better at any of this stuff.
Yeah, I think my son used to get mad at me or irritated with me because I'm a math guy. I love math. And he would come ask me a question, but I'm in the middle of something. And it would be hard for me to shift my focus over to helping him with his math. And then when I did it, I was happy I did it. But at the moment, I'm sure my face said, "What are you doing to me? I'm trying to focus on this."
Yeah, that's right. Well, funny for me, as an officer in the SEAL teams, I would always be running the targets I was on. So the officer, we always had to have a headset, and we had multiple frequencies. So in one ear I had one frequency, in the other ear I'd have another frequency, and so and then I'd have to switch my radio to hear different people. And so part of what I had to get very good at was focusing in on what I needed to hear in the moment, because I had a bunch of stuff coming in, and it's just an exercise in focus. And I remember sometimes I'd have something coming in, and one of my guys would come and say, "Hey boss," and I'd be like, "Hey, hold on, unless it's really critical, right? Just give me a moment.
Right.
Let me get this. Okay, what do you got now?" So you just have to work it. So
I think one of the things that I've always been impressed by and irritated by when they don't do it well are the people on TV when they're doing the news.
Yeah.
And they're able to hear into their headset and be able to, you can see the ones that don't do it well because they stumble, because it's like the ones who do it can listen and just be able to talk.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah. That's probably a good example of someone. Some of them may have been genetically predisposed to be good at that. Others may have had to develop that attribute over time. So who knows?
I know in kindergarten or one of those early developmental schools, there was, I think it's Montessori, but there would be multiple there were multiple conversations going on at the same time. And I would just be bouncing back and forth, and it was distracting for me. I like to be able to focus on one thing and not hear the other things going on. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, me too.
If a team could only focus on developing 3 attributes this year, which ones would you recommend and why?
Oh gosh, again, this is a very subjective answer, Clint. It depends on that.
Let's say I'm not a SEAL and I'm in a business context, running teams that do projects. I'll just
okay. So if in a context of a teaming and general teaming, general teaming is going to require, I think, collaboration. That's an attribute that you're going to want to make sure you work on. I think it's going to require adaptability, and it's probably going to require perseverance. I think those are the 3 important ones. You and I could make an argument for almost any one of them, but I think those 3 would be very important in a teaming environment to work on if it's something you're low on, or if the group holistically is lower on those things. You're going to want to do some diligence. Okay,
so as we kind of wrap things up here, I'm going to talk about things that are important to me because I matter in conversation. So does open-mindedness have an impact, do you think, when you're running teams?
100% it does. And in fact, I think open-mindedness is really important, because the closed mind is never a positive thing in terms of uncertainty and challenge and adaptability and even collaboration. And so open-mindedness allows us to really get out of our own fishbowl and start and try to see something from a different viewpoint. I think curiosity is also important, but if I were to weight the 2, I'd say open-mindedness is more important than curiosity in terms of those attributes. So yes, 100% open-mindedness is really important.
You also wrote about the importance of humility. So how can that attribute help enhance communications across teams and hierarchies?
Well, so humility is super important, because humility is not limited to weaknesses, right? There's a stigma around humility that it's about showing your weakness or showing deference. And humility in the high-performing team sense is I am transparent about my strengths and my weaknesses. I wear it all on my sleeve. And so that's really important, because if you're in a team, your team has to understand when they're going to lean on you and when you're going to lean on them. So you have to wear it all on your sleeve. And so humility allows for every team member to say, okay, here's what I'm great at, here's what I'm not so great at. It's all out there. Now let's work together. So I think you're not going to have an effective team if you don't have a healthy dose of humility in the team members.
Now, if you have poor communication in your team, can that be an indicator of missing attributes?
Well, it could be an indicator of missing attributes, yes, but it's more likely an indicator of missing trust, because trust is built off of transparency. And so if poor communication exists, first I would look at processes. Perhaps the processes aren't supporting proper comms. But if the processes are pretty good, and now I'm looking at, okay, what's the motive behind poor communication? Is there kind of hoarding of information going on? Is there nervousness about someone knowing something? Is knowledge being used for power versus being everywhere? So in environments of poor communication, I'd look first at processes and then at trust.
That actually ties back to an earlier thing you mentioned when we talked about Bob Chapman.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the book, and he mentions it in his book as well, about the situation where they had to sign out things out of the tool shed, and the guys feel like you don't trust us. And if you're a white collar guy, you can come and go as you please. But if I'm a blue collar guy, I got to check in and check out, and I can only go to lunch from this point to that point. And he just did away with all that because he said, we trust you.
Yes.
We wanted to create that environment.
Yeah. Trust is about behavior, and it's about us going first. In other words, we can't make anybody trust us. All we can do is behave in a way that allows someone to choose to trust us, and we have to go first in those behaviors. So what Bob understood, and what a wonderful guy, but what he understood is that I have to go first in the trust relationship. I have to tell you, I trust you, and I'm going to behave in this way that allows you to then trust me. But I go first, and this is the risk that we take. I mean, trust is it's about extending that olive branch and putting away putting away the arms, and it's a risky endeavor, but that's what makes it so valuable when it does work. So Bob knew we have to go first with this before we can't expect them to go first.
Now, if people only take away one thing from your book or today's conversation, what would it be?
It would be that we have to look much more deeply if we're interested in understanding the performance of ourselves and the human beings around us. It is not about those visible things. It's often those visible things are often misleading because the environment might be an easy one. It might not be telling us what we need to see. So performance is so much more than what you're seeing, and some of the most clear understanding of performance actually happens when we are in uncertainty, challenge, and stress. When the what's hitting the fan and people are showing up, we're seeing the raw person, we're seeing the real person, and that's when we can really start understanding each other. And this is the gift we were given at SEAL training. And obviously, I guess we volunteered for it, but day one of SEAL training, you start to figure out yourself at your most raw, and it just goes on, and you start to understand all the people, all the teammates around you, them at their most raw, and you start working together at our most raw. And that's when the magic happens. So you leave an environment like that, and I could be on an airplane, and there's another Navy SEAL on that airplane who I've never met before in my life, and something could happen on the airplane. I know I could go to that human being, and I know exactly how that human being would act because we have this system that just teases this out, and it's very clear. And this is the gift that everybody can give to themselves and their team by understanding who and how they perform at their most raw.
Last two. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, beware the fearless leader was a pretty good one. But I think the other one is that leaders you can't designate yourself a leader. You have to behave in a way. People choose whether or not you're a leader. So in other words, leaders aren't born or made. They're chosen, and they're chosen based on the way you behave.
And what's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Wow. I try to read frequently, but I'd say one of my favorite books is Yuval Harari, and he wrote *Sapiens*, and he's written a couple other ones. *Sapiens* is one of my favorite books, and I think the reason why is the takeaway is that we are all quite human, and this human species that we are all so lucky to be and fortunate to be a part of. It comes with some super cool advantages, some disadvantages as well. But I think diving into ourselves as human beings is a key to understanding ourselves, and that really fires me up. So,
Rich, this has really been great. If people want to learn more about you, engage with you, how can they do that?
Best place is our website, theattributes.com. So www.theattributes.com. You can find everything there. You can find both books there. You can find all the services. You can find the assessment tool, or at least the way to take the assessment. So I think that's the best, easy one-stop shop. Obviously, I'm also on Instagram, Rich_Diviney, and then LinkedIn as well. So
I really appreciate your time today, Rich. It's been awesome to spend time with another sailor, and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.